Hello. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. We know there's a lot of other things that you could have been doing and places that you could have been this evening. So, my name is Talia Burnett. I am the president of the Mountain Movers Ministry here at Macedonia. Um, our ministry is the health ministry of our church. We focus on anything health related, physical health, mental health, and we try to bring light to things that you don't normally get in our community. So if I could have my Mountain Movers members stand, please. Looking all nice in our white. Um, so these ladies help me put whatever thought or idea I have, they help it come into fruition, as well as our pastor. He's very supportive of the ministry and supports these types of events in our church. Tonight's event is going to be focused on grief. In the last couple years, we've had a ton of things that have happened to and around us that I don't think our community knows how to process. And if we do know how to process, the question is, do we actually do it? One thing that I try to stress to my friends is that when it comes to mental health, religion and professional help are not mutually exclusive, which means that you can't say that they can't exist or help at the same time. You need both of them to heal. So you can use God and your therapist to help you heal. And I think that's something that we forget a lot in the Black community and in the Black church. But luckily, we have a congregation and a leader who does believe in that. So we have some wonderful speakers tonight. I'm sorry, I hear my voice shaking, a little nervous. But we have some wonderful speakers tonight, and it's going to be led by our very own Reverend Dr. M. Keith McDaniel. And so at this time, I'm going to pass it over.
Good evening. Let's give God a hand praise. We are certainly grateful for another opportunity to be together, and let's thank our Mountain Movers team. Can you help me celebrate them? I think it very imperative that we have this discussion, and that also as a community of faith that we wrap our hearts and minds around this discussion. So thank you for being here tonight. Our panelists, thank you for being here with us as well, and to our online audience. This conversation is really intended for us to discern the ways in which grief manifests, how we recognize and manage grief. I heard somebody say one time that the world becomes an enemy when you lose that which you have loved. And so tonight we have some great persons who are here with us tonight. I invite you to take a few notes. We're going to spend the entirety of our time in a conversation. So any questions, thoughts, or reflections that you might have, our panelists will be with us afterwards. In our fellowship hall, they have material. Some have books and other resources that might be of a tremendous help for you, and will be available for your questions after the fact. I want to just quickly introduce our panelists, and if they would have just a quick word to get us started. We have Tamara Houston. She is the CEO of Renewal Life Counseling Services, experience in working with adults in significant life transition and grief and trauma, and also the moderator for healingthroughtime.com, which is a virtual resource helping persons experiencing grief and bereavement. Let's give God a hand praise for her tonight. Any opening statement you have for us before we get started?
I just want to share that just the mission associated with Healing Through Time is this. Time does not heal our wounds. It's what you do in between the ticks. So if you hear nothing else from what I share tonight, I hope you're able to take that with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. We have Dr. Cheryl Simmons. She is currently a chaplain at Spartanburg Regional. Over 15 years of experience as a chaplain. She has a Master's of Divinity degree from Wesley Biblical Seminary and her Doctorate of Ministry degree from Andrews University, and also the CEO of Excel Chaplaincy Service in Clinton, South Carolina. Let's give her a hand praise. Thank you.
He told me how to work this.
It's on.
One of the things I want to make sure that we understand this evening when we leave is that grief is normal. It's a normal process. And we each grieve differently, and we each have a right to that grief.
Thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Pastor Gregory Miller. He and his wife, Chelsea, lost their son, Garrick, 5 years ago. And following the passing of their son, they created a foundation in their son's name, which provides resources for losing loved ones, as well as scholarships and donations. Garrick Lawrence Miller Foundation. His wife has also written a book, 521, The Day My Heart Stopped. He and his wife are both teachers. They attend House of Hope in Atlanta. They just literally got off of the highway, and they lead the marriage ministry there. Let's welcome Pastor Miller.
It is once again, it's a pleasure and for the opportunity to be able to take the time to share a word that may encourage you, that may strengthen you, that will bless you. Hopefully a word that all of us share will be able to minister to your heart and minister to your spirit, that whatever trial or whatever challenge you have incurred, the message that will be given to you that will bring strength.
Thank you. Let's celebrate each of them as we get started. Thank you. I think maybe we could start here. Do you have a working definition of grief? If you had to put grief in its own descriptive definition, how would you define grief? And tell us why it's even important to even talk about grief. Any of you can jump right in, and I'd love to hear all three of you. Do you have a working definition of grief, and why is it important to talk about it?
Okay. My definition of grief after 20 years in chaplaincy, 5 years in hospice, and watching so many people die, I've learned that grief is a normal process. It's a reaction to a loss, whether that loss is seen or unseen, heard or unheard. It's still a reaction to a loss.
Okay. It's a reaction to a loss.
And I say loss because grief, you can grieve your job, you can grieve the burning down of your home, you can grieve the loss of a loved one or a relationship. So grief is a normal reaction to that loss.
Okay, thank you.
I think my definition is quite simple. It's a roller coaster of emotions. I think I tend to have some kind of unorthodox thoughts about grief, and one is that I also find that there's beauty in grief as well. This just comes from a space that in order for us to gain and grow and expand, we lose all the time, whether it's people or things, and it creates space. There's certainly a void there that has to be filled in, and we work through that. But in that, there's also opportunity. There's legacy building, things that we get to do, new ways of looking at life and building relationships that we may not experience when we don't lose.
Thank you.
Both of the ladies gave great examples, but one of the things I don't want to reiterate what they've already said, but one thing that ministered to me just now was a lot of time we as men do not know the definition of grief. We don't know how to grieve correctly. So if we look at the definition of what both of them shared, a lot of times we, women love to talk. So
Yes,
they are
Lord.
very emotional. They talk. We as men are more closed mouth and we hold things in. And a lot of times when we get the understanding of what truly the definition of grief is, we as men can learn how to grieve correctly. One beautiful thing that they said, it is normal. And through my experiences, I've learned that to grieve correctly, because when you do not grieve correctly based on a significant loss, regardless of what that loss is, because again, a lot of time we relegate it to someone passing or someone transitioning from this world, and that's the only definition that we use. That's what we have carried for years. But what we are opening up now and hearing is that the women are saying that there's more ways to experience grief, and we have to be able to recognize the signs and know how to handle them when those signs are come upon us, because we can find ourselves going in a direction that we do not want to go in, especially as men.
I think that's an excellent place for us to start. So Dr. Simmons, you kind of opened that door to help us understand that grief isn't just one-dimensional. It's not simply about the loss of life, but loss of opportunity, loss of possibility, home, career, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
And Pastor, you've put your finger on a pulse that maybe there are a lot of men that don't necessarily know how to grieve, right? Because men can tell you what they think a whole lot faster than they can tell you how they feel. So what do you mean, if you could just elaborate a little bit on grieving correctly? What does that look like? Can you expound about that a little bit more?
If we understand, even with the 5 steps of grieving, even with a lot of times we don't understand the denial that we go through, or the shock that we go through in the beginning, because we don't understand. It may be a process where we deal with anger. Anger may set in, and then we could transition to, and going through these stages, we don't see it as normal because we as men, we don't know that is normal. Then we'll try to go through the bargaining stage with like, okay, what can I do to make this right? We also allow guilt to come in. And when all those things start hitting you at once, and it's not necessarily in that type of order, but when it hits you at once, you don't know how to deal with it. And then you find yourself dealing with something that is normal, but we don't know how to handle it. But if we understand truly the stages of how we handle grief, then we as men can be able to handle it correctly. And it's definitely okay to have a therapist. The world has told you something is wrong with you if you have a therapist. That's the best thing you need to help you go through it. My wife and I, we had therapists to help us go through the transition of our son. And I went through different stages. I mean, I went through the denial. I can't believe this happened. No, I'm saying, Lord, we doing everything right. So we say we doing everything right, So the guilt came in, the not wanting to do anything, not wanting to associate or deal with anyone. All of those different feelings came up. But had we not had the right sources, those feelings that we experienced could have told us, this is abnormal for you. You should not be thinking this way. You should not be feeling this way. This is not normal. But once we learned the stages that we knew we was going to go through, and then go through in necessarily that order. I know some people experience anger. We didn't experience the anger. That was one of them that we didn't. But we did dealt with the depression. All of those different avenues. So that's what I'm looking at. Us as men trying to understand the stages of what we are actually dealing with, so that we can say it's okay to grieve. I'm a man. but I'm okay because I'm a man. You know, we don't have to be hard about saying that it's not okay to grieve. It is okay as men to grieve.
I don't know if I would use the word grieve correctly, because that gives a sense that there's a right way and a wrong way to grieve. I would like to use the word healthy.
Okay.
To grieve healthy, where I may cry, I may yell, I may fall on the floor or something like that, and that may be okay for me. That may not be okay for you. But one thing about grief is this is my grief, my personal feelings, and no one gets to tell me how to do it.
Right.
It may be uncomfortable for you to see me cry, or it's been a month later and I'm still in my emotions. And when I hear that song, I just came back to church and I heard Mama's favorite song and I start crying. And then Sister so-and-so over here thinks I should be beyond that already. Well, you don't get to put a timeline on my grief.
Right. Right. Let me ask a question, and I want to start with you, Houston, and because some things are so stressful that it puts an extreme amount of pressure on us mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I'm not always sure and convinced that some people even know they're grieving. Help us understand how, are there some things that we may be able to pick up on within ourselves or in the lives of people that we love to be able to identify grief? Is there a way that we can identify, put our finger on and say that's a manifestation of grief?
So that's an interesting question because if we take all the definitions and the discussion that we've had thus far, it's a very unique experience. So the presentation for everyone can look very different. You were discussing about not experiencing anger in terms of stages and phases, but you did experience depression. For someone else, they may experience that. I like to look at, in terms of determining where you are in your grief process, is that it is a holistic process. So you're talking about how it's impacting you behaviorally. Like, what are you doing? Are you eating? Are you able to get up and take a shower, or, you know, take care of your kids, that types of things? What are you doing? What is the action? What's going on spiritually with you? It may not be anger at specifically anyone, but you might be angry at God and questioning, like, why this person? Why now? Why my family member? Why not this person over here? My family member was good, but this person over here is doing all this stuff. Why does it have to be me? Mentally and emotionally, like, there could be changes in your mood, irritability. You could certainly be angry. There could certainly be times where you are depressed. There's a interesting, like, activity I share. I mentioned about a roller coaster, but it's also like a ball of yarn as well. There's a starting place for it, but it's all tangled up. You don't, like, get a ball of yarn and say, I'm getting ready to make a purse, and you get the scissors and cut down into it. Then you got all these little pieces, right? You start in a place and it's holistic. There may be some mental changes that happen. There may be some behavioral, some spiritual changes, physical changes that may happen, right? You might eat too much. You might not eat enough. So there may be changes in your weight in terms of your appearance, things like that. But on the other end of the spectrum is there, you also may come into contact and experience on your own where there's no real presentation of it at all, because you keep it to yourself, because you may not be as emotive as someone else may be around you. There really is no right or wrong way. To reference what was shared before about it being healthy, what I would say is that what we want to look for is that people aren't engaging in things that we would consider to be maladaptive or harmful to themselves. You're not hurting yourself by staying in the bed. Your family might not like it, but you're not hurting anybody, right? You're not hurting anybody else, right? Those would be like the things that I would cue into. Are you doing anything to harm yourself or harm anyone else? So one of those things may be when we're talking about suicidal ideation and attempts, right? That would be a point of concern for me, that I would say to a friend, family member, or a foe, like, what's going on here? How can I support you? Can I offer you some resources? Because that would be something that we don't want you to engage in that particular type of behavior at all. Like, we want you here as long as possible.
Correct.
And to be able to support you as well throughout this process.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Would you add anything to that? How do we identify grief?
Well, one of the things that she shared a lot about the numbness of it, becoming isolated, becoming more introvert, not necessarily wanting to share or talk. All stress, you deal with stress at a more level, at a higher level, the things that you used to could handle, you might not be able to handle what you're dealing with now. And the signs will be showing that you're experiencing some type of grief that you're dealing with. But when you go through all of the different emotional aspects of grief, the numbness, the pain, the guilt, it's all of the things similar to the stages, and that is how other people, just say those that want to support you,
Right.
recognize that that's the stage that you're in. Or it's not necessarily they have to know a stage. They just got to know that there's something that is not you're not dealing with that you normally deal with on a normal basis. Your reactions to things and how you handle things is you're presenting it in a different way.
Sure.
And when they're doing those things, you as the person that care about your loved ones, want to support them, that helps you to know the signs. And sometimes we have to look into what are the signs. Just like what you just asked, when our loved ones are going through things, we who are on the outside that can be that moral support for them, let us help, because they can't see the things that they're going through. So we have to also be knowledgeable to be able to say, okay, this is a sign that we see. How can we help them? How can we support them in their grief that we recognize that they may be going through?
I just think it important for us to begin to find ways to identify, because if you never get to the real issue, you're just dealing with the symptoms.
Exactly.
Right? And behavior is often just symptomatic of a deeper issue. I want to come back to something that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Simmons. I think your comment was important. You said it's my grief, and no one can tell me how long it takes to move through that. I saw this quote, Dr. Kubler-Ross and David Kessler, of course, they're all over grief. You all know that. I found this quote, and it kind of zeroed in right with the statement that you made, and then I want to pose a question. It says, the reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You'll learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same, nor should you want to be the same. My question, in light of the comment you made earlier and the quote, how do we then support others who are grieving so that we don't come off as, you should be over that by now, or you're doing this wrong, or you need to let that go? How can we be a support to each other?
I think we're starting here by trying to understand what grief is and how it manifests itself. That's number one. And after doing that, giving people the space they need and the time that they need to heal, to work through their grief. We have a lot of cliches that we say. We say that they're in a better place. that God needed another flower in his garden.
I can't stand it. I cannot stand that.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You hear where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
And
Don't y'all get up at no more funerals. God don't need no more flowers in his garden. Okay.
And I'm saying that because when we mean well, but when we say it to that person in that moment, it's empty words.
Yeah.
And then when someone said it to me when my mother died, that God needed another flower in his garden, can I stand up just a moment? I got an attitude.
Yeah.
And they say the right preacher, I was like, you mean to tell me that a God that is so big, that can create a world
Right.
just by speaking it, needed another flower, and he chose my mother?
That's a terrorist.
And that's exactly how I saw it.
Yeah.
Yes. So be careful with our cliches.
Yeah.
We all have them. And a lot of time it's because we don't know what else to say. We think we mean well. Silence is golden. Sometimes just to come and sit with a person, to sit beside them, and just sit there. Don't say a word. Let them talk. Let them share. And don't judge people. Because if I fall out crying, Pastor, don't judge me. Because, see, you don't know what my mother meant to me. You understand what I'm saying? So we each have relationships, and we try to pacify by using cliches to help us feel good. But it's not doing anything for the person who's grieving. So be there with them. Allow them to grieve as much time as it takes.
I love that. I love that. Any of you like to add to that?
I would also say silence is golden, but also it's okay to talk about the person. Like, let's not act like they didn't exist, right? I have a grandfather, grandmother, parents, aunts, and uncles that have passed, and I don't call them by that man or that woman. That's my granddaddy, right? And so when I'm having conversations with people, like, it's okay for you to talk about your loved one as well, and not act like it's a family secret or something. So to hear that person's name, to know that they existed and you had a relationship with them, other people had a relationship with them, they're special, they still are special. That is very validating, I think, in our grief as well. And also, this is just do something for people. And what I mean by that is it's okay to just take over a lasagna and just say, like, I made a meal, it's in the freezer. Go over there and clean up the house. Offer to pick up the children and take them to school. There's a lot that you can do that doesn't have to stop after the 2 weeks after someone has passed. Like, continue to be present. And there are small things that you can do. They mean everything. Like, a small offer is a huge offer. When you, oftentimes as the griever, you may not know exactly what it is that you need in that moment.
Right.
You may not want to ask because people kind of scatter away after a couple of days, a couple of weeks, or whatever. So if you are an observer of someone's grief, it is okay for, like, you to still show up, right? They may not be as emotive. You may think they should be in a different place, but they're not in a different place. So just show up anyway.
I love that. And I think it's important, and I also believe there's a lot of comfort in knowing that the person that we lost is not forgotten. But I also think it comes with great difficulty because you have to rely on memory. So are there community resources and community support groups? Are there things within our community that we should be connecting persons to, or even ourselves, as it relates to grief?
I'll share. I was telling her earlier that I'm not from Spartanburg, so the resources that I think about are more like national services. You mentioned David Kiesler. If you were to look him up, it's David Kessler. It's Kessler. He has a group called Tender Hearts that he offers a lot of free things, offering support, and he also has like a monthly subscription as well. But I, as a clinician, like I follow his stuff as well. Because he's just, even though he's not a clinician, but he worked in hospice. He worked with Dr. Kubler-Ross while she was battling cancer herself. So he has really been in the trenches when it comes to grief and bereavement work. So I really appreciate him as a resource. Locally, you can always check in with your churches that may offer a program called Grief Share. So that is like a national program. If they don't have one at your church, maybe you need to be the one to ask, can we start one? Maybe you need to be the one to facilitate one. There are trainings for that. Checking with your local funeral homes. They often have services as well that they offer for bereavement support programs. And then, of course, therapy. I am a therapist, so I am certainly biased. Typically, when people come to me, it's more of a prolonged grief experience. So it's been going on for quite some time, or the symptoms that are related to that are a little bit more intense that we experience in a non-complicated grief situation. But still, a therapist can be a great support to you. Just again, maybe if you don't have someone in your life that can just be there and listen and help you process what's going on with you, being able to share about different types of models around grief. The models in itself is, he was talking about the stages and phases. They're not linear, so it's not like you visit this one stage and you finish that, then you move on to the next one. Then when you're done, you're done. It doesn't work like that, right? We on a roller coaster on this thing. So it is just to simply help you to understand and gain more education and normalize what your experience is. So you take what you need and you leave what you don't.
Another resource is hospice. All hospices have a bereavement program. They're required to have one. And here in Spartanburg Regional Hospice has a grief support group.
Okay.
So you can always check with
Okay.
them.
We've spent a lot of time tonight talking about how challenging and heavy grief may be for adults. Let's talk about children for a little bit, because they experience trauma and sadness and stress as well. Are there different indicators for children? What should parents and guardians pay attention to in the lives of young people?
I like to jumpstart on that one because that's an area that I'm most concerned with our children. They're the ones I consider as being disenfranchised. And disenfranchised, I mean, as adults, we're comfortable talking with other adults about adult stuff, even about grief. But when it comes down to bereavement and grief and pain and hurting, a loss, we overlook the children. So the child could be in the room and we're talking to adults, not realizing that the mother, the lady that died, was this child's mother. But not only was she his mother, she was his first teacher. She was his nurse, his cook, his bedtime storyteller, the person that taught him the first words about Jesus. She was a lot of things to this child. So he didn't just lose his mother. And no one wants to talk to him about that. And so what we normally say is, I need to be strong. And I need to be strong for Johnny. Well, Johnny gets his cues from us. He learns how to grieve by us. We tell him whether it's okay or not to cry. And so Daddy may have to come in there and sit with Johnny and cry and say, I miss your mother too.
Yeah. Pastor?
I think one of the things as well is that we got to make sure that we have that dialogue with the child. And in having that dialogue, we're supporting them and we're telling them, not only modeling it, like you said, but we got to be able to talk to them and let them know that it is okay to grieve. It's okay to give them their space. Sometimes with the children, we may have to dialogue with them and talk to them about the loss of the loved ones, while at the same time we may shift to an activity or something for them to do, but we are also not dwelling totally on it. And then we may have to come back again and talk to them and continue to let them know, because it's a process. One thing that they said was grief. The key word I've learned over the years of this last 5 years is new normal. So I've learned, my wife and I have learned how to live a new normal, and the child has to learn how to live that new normal as well. And so many times the child is the one that's, we say, lost in the sauce. They don't think about that because of what they're dealing with. So even if that adult cannot, we have to find somebody that can recognize and enter that child's world. And I always say enter their world and understand what they're experiencing from a child standpoint, because the grief is different. So we have to be more safe with them, but also give them their space. And also talk to them and tell them it's okay. And the beautiful thing that I love, you said, we got to model it. Over the years, that's what the child has learned. They learn from us. So, and one thing you said was that if daddy might have to come in there and cry. So if daddy has learned to be a man and not to share tears, then what is the child gonna do? The child is gonna hold that grief and what they're feeling in as well. So we have to be very conscious of that and say that as a man, if we step in, we have to say it's okay for us to show our children how to cry and tell us that we miss such and such as well. Okay. So that's the part that I see that's very important.
Okay, thank you. Would you add to anything said?
Yeah. So a couple of things around like what you may look for in a child is like changes in their mood. If they become quite irritable or angry, that may be some of what you may see. It may just be like a physical presentation. They're complaining of like headaches or stomach aches or just being nauseous, having trouble with sleep. For all of us parents in the room, we know our kids can be quite inquisitive. They have lots of questions about lots of things. This is certainly going to be one of those things. They want to know where grandma went. They want to know, well, is this going to happen to you? They want to know, is this going to happen to me? So they will have a lot of questions, and it's okay for us to answer those questions. It's also okay for us to say, we don't know. We don't know, but I'm here for you. Aunts, uncles, cousins, you have a lot of people around you that love you. And also, I just want to stress the importance of touch as well. We do not function in a vacuum as adults, and our children don't either. They want to cuddle. They want to spend time with us. They just want to be next to us, even if it's just, kind of rubbing up against our shoulder and stuff. So that touch is very validating and reassuring to them that someone is there with them through this process. And you're going through a very similar process that they are. But just being there, being present for them and reassuring them, I think will be some of the things that we'll want to do with our children.
You may even see some regression with some children. They'll start wetting the bed. They can't sleep. Their behavior, they act up in school. Or they become clingy because they're afraid that you're going to die too. So you might see some behavior changes there.
Okay. Yes.
I'm actually a teacher, and that's one thing that I've experienced with children where the parent have called me and made us aware during the school setting that this child just lost such and such. So I've learned to look at them differently and try to deal with them differently, because I have seen the aggression. I've seen them I'm sick, I'm not feeling good, I want to go home. All of those signs that they just shared, those children exerted those symptoms. So those are the signs that we are looking for, because I actually had hands-on experience with dealing with them, and I had to learn, how to really be more, I'm gonna say, respectful of their situation, their circumstance, and deal with them differently, and say that it's okay that you may not want to do this work now.
Sure. But at some point, you've got to do the work, right? And I think there's great value in knowing your own grief story. So my son was murdered a year ago on a Sunday. I pastor this church, and on that particular Sunday morning, the sermon was on God's protection, how God keeps us, how God protects us, and how we should have great faith and great confidence in God's protection. We had a family within our church whose grandson had been missing for 3 weeks, and one of the deacons before the service asked if I would pray. And when you hear 3 weeks, you automatically think the worst, right? But sometimes you have to lift your voice even when you can't lift your head, right? Only to get a message from the deacon. He said, praise God. They found the boy. Prayer works. They found him in Charlotte. Family's on the way to get him. And I said, well, praise God for answering that prayer. I'm on my way to identify my son's body. Same day, right? And so I'm bringing this up because you triggered us with even the loss of your own son, right? And how do you process, and how do you do the internal work of managing your own grief? A, so that you can begin that healing, and B, that you don't bleed on other people. So when you all think about your own grief stories, what has been your process of identifying your own grief and managing your own grief? Books are great, right? Videos are great. Seminars are great. But when it's in your face, when it hits your house, sometimes all the training and all the 5-point steps, they go out the window, and you start building a plane and flying it at the same time. Tell me, I want to start with you, and then we'll work our way back, because you kind of started us with the therapy.
Okay, one of the things that both my wife and I experienced, yes, it was something that we couldn't fathom. And on top of us not being able to fathom, going through the therapy and everything was good. But we had started identifying our own therapy. We said, okay, so what is our therapy for us that's going to help us, even though we're getting the help, we need to start finding things that going to help not only memorialize and remember our son. So we came up with the foundation. As it for us is therapy. We have these bands that we created. They got several things on: Keep Pushing, the other one, Mighty Victorious Warrior, because that's what my son's name was. His name, Gary Lawrence Miller, stood for Mighty Victorious Warrior. So with all of these different bands, we wear these bands and never take them off. I don't care how dirty, whatever happened. A good shower cleans them up good.
Yeah.
But that's our therapy for us. When I go to we used to always get our hair cut. I always took them when we get our hair cut. When my wife and I go to the cemetery, I got hedge clippers that I trim around the site. That therapy for me reminds me of us going to get our hair cut.
Yeah.
And it blesses me to be able to do that, because we could be riding down to my mother-in-law's house, and we'll stop by. We say, well, let's stop by and see him. He needs a haircut today. So I'll get the head trimmers out and trim around him. I have a picture that one of the ministers at our church actually painted. We have it sitting down in our room at nights. My wife will go down and kiss him good night. I mean, I'll go down some nights, kiss him on the forehead. Good night. I'll see you in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, these are our personal therapy that helps us make it through understanding our new normal and being okay with our new normal, knowing that he has transitioned, he's with the Lord, but we had to find what helps us get through the grieving process. So I want to encourage everybody, it's okay to find those different things, and it may seem abnormal to everybody else, but this is not your story. This is my story.
Right.
So if you see me out there trimming around there, and they saying, well, the man cut, why he trimming? That's my therapy
Right.
for me. So that's the
Okay.
beauty about being able to find within yourself what is your therapy that will help you on a daily basis, along with the resources and the support.
I love it. I love it. Others, what's been your grief story, and how have you navigated those waters of grief yourself?
For me, it was naming it. I was upset. I was angry. I don't care how long I've been a pastor, a chaplain, and all that other stuff. I was angry. And I had to say that. And once I was able to verbalize that and say, God, I am angry. I see my mother every weekend. We have these conversations. We talk. And all of a sudden, she's in the hospital on Wednesday. Stage 4 cancer, breast cancer. No one knew. I thought out of 5 kids, at least she would have told me. You know, didn't say a word. Saturday morning, Mama's dead. I was upset. And I'm wondering, how could God allow this to happen? Why didn't I see the signs? I mean, I've been in the hospital all my life pretty much. What happened here? And when I said, God, I'm upset, I'm angry, my mother should have told me. And once I was able to get that out, I started the healing process. I started that process. And that's what worked for me. As a result of that, it made me more empathetic to other people in their loss. So when I'm at the hospital and a daughter or a son has lost their parent, I'm able to come alongside them in a total different way. Because I can reach back to my own pain and at least empathize and say, this is possibly what they're feeling. And I can minister to them in that.
I would say that my own experience with grief, although growing up I had experienced family members dying, of course, my idea of death and grief was quite concrete. And it wasn't until I was maybe in my 20s that I really began to kind of delve into that. I remember I was in grad school and my grandmother died, 2 aunts died, all 2 months apart from each other. And I was not able to be there with them during those times. And I was very conflicted. I remember spending time with my family and watching family have fun. I was quite conflicted about that and very angry because I didn't understand. I just didn't understand. And so that took me on a journey where I didn't know this at the time, because I thought I was just doing it because it was my plan and it was my career, but God had other plans for me. But I've pretty much dedicated my life, my career at least, to helping other people work through their grief. I worked in hospice for 8 years at the start of my career and contribute that to the clinical therapist that I am now. I've seen more people pass away, like be in the room with them and watch them take their last breath that I care to count, and at a very young age. in my early 20s doing so. And it just gave me a deeper appreciation for life. It gave me a deeper appreciation for death. And so I am just on a journey to help other people as they maneuver through their own journeys.
Yeah, because we all experience pain and loss, and grief is a thing that knows where we all live, and I think it's very important for us to think about, to ask ourselves the questions that you all have mentioned, to do the work. You know, I feel most upset about this. I am most hurt about this. These are the things that keep me from moving forward. This is where I still find joy. You know, journaling those thoughts and those feelings in real time, I think, can be helpful. Let me ask you this as we start to move to the close. Has this conversation been helpful for you thus far? Let me ask each of you this question, and then we'll close here, and I'll call up Sister Fernandez. She has some things for us. If each of you would spend maybe about 2 or 3 minutes thinking about where grief fits into our journey with God. You know, we have this thing called, you know, theodicy, you know, trying to explain the goodness of God in the midst of terrible and hellacious realities. How is God all-powerful and good, and yet I'm going through all of this, what you were talking about earlier. When we think about the reality that grief is a part of our existence, grief is the price you pay because you love, right? How does grief fit into our journey with God? No particular order. Just kind of tell us what comes to mind, and this will be our concluding 2 or 3 minutes for each of you. I see you, Pastor.
Okay, I'll start it. One of the things that when I experienced the transition of my son, I was asking myself, you know, just like we all do, why did it happen? But what I started doing, one thing that did not stop me was I studied, I read scriptures. I read the word crying, spitting, snotting, and everything else. But what happened was, the more I studied, the word became more real to me in that season of grief. And the more I continued to put the word in me, and I'm part of this men's group, and I even share it with them. I said, the more I studied the word, and I didn't even see the transition. Yeah. You know, when I'm studying the word, and I'm saying, I'm gonna still study on your word. I'm gonna still study your word. I'm gonna still eat your word. And still snotting and crying and everything else, doing all of the above. But as I stayed with the word, ultimately, God made the transition and showing me how his word comforted me and allowed me to make it through the grief process, to go through the transition, how to handle all the different things. He pulled me to different scriptures. And I just kept going and kept going and kept going to that transition start allowing me to be okay with the numbness, be okay with all of the different things that I'm going through, but the word is what brought about the change.
Yeah.
For my experience, I stuck with it. I stayed with it. You know, most time people want to shut down, don't want to talk to God, don't want to say anything. But I said, okay, God, I can't do this. I got to stay in your word and keep eating your word. And he did the transition in the midst of my grief.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Miller, for being with us tonight. Yes.
Yeah, I would say that the greatest story of grief, loss, and healing is that God gave up his son for us so that we may have everlasting life. So who am I? Who am I? In the work that I do, it is hard. I'm getting choked up now.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
But I pray for my clients.
Yeah.
I pray for the people that I serve, even if they don't believe. because I know that there's healing on the other side.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tamara Houston, for being with us tonight.
It's amazing that she would bring up that God gave his son, because I was thinking that. I had a lady to ask me when her son died. She said, well, where was God when my son died? And I told her he was in the same place he was when his son died.
Mm-hmm.
The elements were grieving. The sun refused to shine. Earthquakes, they were all grieving the loss of Jesus Christ. And so in telling her that and losing my mother, I had to reflect on that same story. And then I said to myself, I said, Cheryl, either you believe what you're telling other people, or you don't. Either God is real for you as you're telling other people. And I came to the conclusion, I'm going to go all the way with him.
My.
I'm going to trust him even though I can't see him. I'm going to hold on to him, because what other choice do I have?
Yeah.
So I will cling to the old rugged cross.
My.
And one day, I'll get that crown.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Simmons, for being with us. Can we give each of them thank you? Thank you. Thank you. They will be in our fellowship hall. They have resource material. I encourage you to spend some time with each of them this evening. If they have pamphlets or books, let's support them in their efforts to bring healing and wholeness to others. Amen. Thank you, Mountain Movers. Let's celebrate our Mountain Movers again. Teresa Fernandez, if she would come at this time, I think she's got some information to share with us before our closing prayer. Okay.
At this time, we're going to read an affirmation together, if you don't mind. This affirmation is just kind of reminding us of all this wonderful information that's been given to us. Not only these three, but our pastor actually shared some wonderful information as well.
Amen.
So while the affirmation comes on the screen, we're going to read together. Number 1, I release the tension in my body and relax. I allow myself to feel my grief and then let go. I recognize pain for moments, but I take comfort in the memories. I hold on to love and release grief. I can feel happy and hopeful today. I give myself space to feel all of my emotions. I can ask for help when needed. I choose peace. So guys, when you're leaving out to go to the tables to get some of this wonderful information that the panelists have brought to give to you, you're going to also get a copy of those affirmations, just to kind of look back and reflect on. Also, too, along with that, you're going to also get a stone that has an affirmation on it. Just a nice reminder of all this great information that's been given, this grief seminar, your loved one, or it could be that fight, that good grief fight that we, if not is encountering now, will encounter someday, because we all go through grief. And as you've seen and as you've heard, grief is different for everyone, but it's real. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let us stand for a closing word of prayer. Father, we thank you today for your steadfast love, for your presence in our lives. We thank you that you love us. We thank you that you know more than we do. When we are lost and confused, you are still right there with us. We thank you for your grace and your mercy and your peace. All of the storms that we have found ourselves in, you have brought us through every last one of them. We stand here today as living and breathing examples of what God can do in the lives of those who do not lose hope or faith. We pray, God, that you would ever heal us on this journey. Some of us are doing the best we can to lift our heads, but our heads are lifted. Some of us are doing the best we can to pray, but we're still praying. Some of us are doing the best we can to hold on to a measure of faith, but we still have that mustard seed of belief within our hearts and our minds that you can do anything but fail. We pray, God, for every soul that is hurting, every soul that is confused, every soul that has questions. May, in your own time and in your own grace, provide the healing that we all stand in the need of. Help us to be healers of each other. Help us to sojourn with each other, that we might understand that we are not alone, that not only have you graced us with your power, your word, and your presence, but you've gifted us with good people that help make difficult days digestible. We thank you for this time together tonight. May it ever live in our hearts and our minds. In Christ's name we do pray. Let us all say amen.